The relationship between money and power is enormous when it comes to smuggling and when it comes to bribing. So if you're traveling with money, you are very, very vulnerable. If you have been able to store it back home with family and receive it along the way, you are going to undergo reduced extortion. But no matter who you are, you're going to have to pay bribes. And that's a power dynamic that none of the migrants and refugees we interviewed was able to avoid, particularly in Colombia, where the bribes and the corruption was rife. When migrants and refugees were crossing the Darién Gap, which is it's about 100 square mile expanse of jungle and swamp, there was a group of people inside that jungle that they called the Mafia, which was really a rogues gallery of paramilitary, con artists, guides, thieves, you name it. Pretty much everyone we'd interviewed somehow had been robbed of something, if not of everything. And one Ghanaian man said he exited in his underwear.
Migrants from Asia and Africa fly from the other side of the world into South America. From there, they travel north towards the US and Canada in search of safety, security, and opportunity. This journey has immense financial costs, especially if a migrant or refugee is starting in an unstable socioeconomic position, potentially fleeing crisis. Smugglers are often considered to be the bad guys, but migrants and refugees may view them differently. Smugglers can serve as guides through unfamiliar areas and may be the only operators offering assistance to get through or even completely bypass complicated borders. Smugglers understand that they offer a valuable and sometimes necessary service, which means they are in a position to take advantage of vulnerable people.
Smugglers provide various services to migrants. Some are simply going to provide you a fake forged document. And others will ensure that you get from your door in Nepal to the port of entry in the United States where you are going to declare asylum. And so those packages are very, very expensive. Those can go up to $40,000. But if you're going to just be partially smuggled, maybe through the Darién Gap, maybe around Nicaragua, which is very necessary now because Nicaragua has closed its borders, so you need to secure a fishing vessel to take you around. Those are lightly smuggled people, and they could expect to spend much less, kind of a pay-as-you-go smuggling menu, if you will.
Kim Wilson and her research team from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy learned that where you come from has an interesting impact on the cost of your journey. Africans and Asians traveled differently, with Africans often paying for expenses as they went, and Asians paying for a more complete package, including smuggling fees that secured their entire travel.
Smugglers are very easy to find. No one mentioned that they had any trouble finding smugglers. They're very easy to find in your village back in Nepal or your village in India. They are there. There are people in the village. They're recruiting right there. And it's pretty easy to find them in Africa as well. You just have to ask around, who can help me get out? People in the African part of the journey were smuggled just short distances, so let's say from Cameroon to Nigeria or through Nigeria. And then often they would just get on a bus and go to the airport. So they weren't smuggled as much. They didn't have to pay that kind of smuggling fee because they weren't on a full package. So I don't think we met a single African that was on a door-to-door package. So Africans tended to, because they didn't have to pay as much as an Asian, their journeys were cheaper. One strategy of Africans was to gather in funds before they went, and they might leave those funds with family members. So, for example, a Ghanaian man knew he had to leave. There was a problem. He had to assume some tribal duties that he didn't want to assume. They involved human sacrifice, and he was abhorrent. He was a Christian, and that was abhorrent to him. And so he had time to sell his business, liquidate it for about $5,000. Now, he wasn't comfortable traveling with that amount of money, so he left it with a friend, and that friend would then send him a remittance. So that was a common story of people coming from Africa. But also Africans tended to stop and earn money along the way. They would take odd jobs. And I think many were disappointed that Brazil, a lot of the work had dried up because they seemed to really like Brazil, those that had entered there. They felt the food was much more familiar to them. They felt the lifestyle was something that was very compatible with them. And they really didn't want to move north, but they felt that they had absolutely no work prospects because the government was nudging them out in the post-infrastructure build of the Olympic Stadium and the World Cup stadiums and other kinds of support.
Current border policy says that to immigrate to the United States, you need certain types of visas to enter, like a highly skilled worker visa, where the country accepts doctors or scientists, or you need to be seeking asylum, which means you can demonstrate you might be killed in your home country because of your identity. But many people are on the move for simpler reasons. They're trying to escape poverty, or there are no jobs available back home, or political instability has made their home country too turbulent to live a normal life. Migrants have an incentive to change their stories when they reach the U.S. border, saying they fled from extreme violence in order to be granted access to the United States. It means that current immigration law and policy isn't working.
And those that were continuing to move north were changing their stories to be more U.S. border appropriate. And so those stories looked less and less economic and more about fleeing persecution. And what this signaled to me is that, which a lot of people have been talking about, is we need massive border reform because the only way people can enter is by seeking asylum or the special kinds of visas that we offer. But they're often not seeking asylum. They want to come to the U.S. because there's opportunity there, and they're willing to work very hard for it. So there is a Harvard professor, Lant Pritchett, who has proposed for years now that we should be looking at guest visas or guest worker visas. And this is something I think we really need to take a look at because many of the Nepalis don't necessarily want to send for their families once they get here. They would like to earn money and go home. And we need them in a lot of jobs. I think you saw perhaps Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, Chairman Powell, describe our labor market and how we're in a slack period and we're not replacing workers fast enough. So we need all these strong, resilient people that we met during our interviews to be part of the United States, even if it's not permanently.
Using finance as a lens to view migrant and refugee journeys helps us understand the way decisions get made. We can see the difficult choices migrants have to make, the dangers they experience, and what success really looks like. This other migration path is an important one, and big changes need to occur in order to preserve people's safety and dignity. To learn more about Kim Wilson, refugee journeys, or additional research on migration, visit the Institute for Human Security and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University.